Welcome back. My name is Michael Wickerson. I am continuing with a series that's supporting parametric design both at MGSM and at KCAI this fall. And I'm on to the seventh kind of cluster of scripts as I move through the ribbon tools. And we've actually jumped into the sets series right now. And in maths, I think it's very important. I definitely think sets is the most important. Vectors is also very important, along with understanding everything else. So I've just got 1, 2, 3, 4 scripts here, and we'll take a look at each one and maybe take a look at what we're actually clicking as we go through in the Rhino viewport. Maybe I'll leave both out because I'm not sure if the scripts tend to want to show off something two-dimensional or three-dimensional. So jumping into sets list, you get some really nice items that you put to use quite a bit. I do dance a lot with usually the first ones that are recommended. If you're not seeing all of these here, I'll just say go up to display and go up to view and hit view obscure components, and you'll get more than what you see here. So view obscure components, you get quite a bit. You can drag that down. It's recommended on a couple of sites. Drag it down to 4 or 5, 3 or 4 long, so you can jump in. So what have I written here as exercise sets list? List manipulation is essential for Grasshopper from a simple list to list of lists to list of lists of list of lists. And that will maybe make a little sense to you as you get farther into Grasshopper and its data structures and how it thinks about data trees. Understanding your data is key to constructing controlled, concise, clear, and intelligent projects. If a project can be intelligent, but at least you can be. Reset data recorder. This is a little exercise, and I just give a little bit of guideline 1, 2, 3. So you can go in here and hit reset on the data recorder. I believe that's starting it. That'll reset it. So there's no data in there. And then what did I tell myself to do? Run animation for 24 frames. So I think I went up here and the count, maybe the seeds are what I've actually been playing with. Let me think what I did here. I have nothing coming out of the variable pipe to start. But I think what I can do is take this through a seed count, making sure that things are visible. So I do want to click on that. There's nothing there yet. And then I'm just going to take this iteration through animation 24 frames. And it'll default to a new folder on my desktop. And there you go. You can see that it actually builds itself. A three-dimensional kind of model is built out of rods. And that's basically that script. It's just kind of, if you were given a bunch of wooden dowels, what would you make from it? And that's a fun little exercise. And actually, I did the wrong. I did the seed slider here. I could have used this slider, which was indicating the index. So let's try that again. Clear our data. Make sure we're looking at the Multitype Tool. And go back up here and let's run an animation series as 24, which will override what was just there. So there you go. It builds something a little different, and actually nicely it builds it so each end to end is always together. So it's a little, it's kind of just a little fabrication tool that I wrote, and I did it because I wanted to teach how to understand lists and what's going on in them. So 1, 2, 3, there you go. And the third thing was preview the Multitype Tool. Make sure you preview it. So when you come to my scripts, it's probably important to just grab here and hit ungroup. That way you can go in and see what's happening. So I grab the center box, there it is, and I set my X, Y, Z to 11, and I can make that larger, I can make that smaller as we go, but 11 seems to be a nice little number. That's the region that we're going to populate with 24 count. And you can change that, you can have more, you can have less than that count. 24 seems to be working, and it works nice with the frame. And then seed will change the orientation of where those spots are. Not doing anything, but here's a list length, and there you go. You've seen how a list length tool works fairly carefully, and it'll count how many are within there. So if I have a count of 24, it's going to have a count of 24. So taking the point, I'm going to deconstruct it, and I thought it was interesting, and here's a little list index number that if I have a list of all these points, I can actually count through those 100. This one will show me, without putting points, I can put this on visible, and I can take it and run through all those points one at a time. When I do that, it's nice because you can default moving your list index from one side to the other. And what you ended up doing is I took my list of values, the whole population of these points, put them in as values A, and then I keyed the value for the Y component here. So I end up getting a list item as I run through in the Y direction as it moves from one side to the other. It jumps up and down to do that. And it's probably easiest to see what's happening. What is the easiest one? You see it in the right viewport. You see how it's kind of climbing across, but because there's only 24, it keeps resetting. And that little bit of understanding of sorting lists, which is wonderful in the, I believe it's in here, the sort list. It's wonderful to control your data. You don't have to script that into a C script or anything like that. It's all ready for you. And here's the pipes. And of course, as you record data, it just keeps recording data. So you want to clear your data again and see what was happening there specifically. And I had this one up to 100. So as I put it in all the way up to 100, I can reset it again. I'll leave it the way it kind of jumps to itself. This one I sorted the key values in the Z direction, and it produced a list that, as we take this one through, let's see what happens to that dot. You can see that in the resetting as it comes from the top. In the front view, you can see what it's kind of doing. It's starting at the top and going all the way down. And it's just the Z direction. It keeps repeating and repeating. So I do like to use sort list a lot when I'm trying to build geometries and keep it in an XYZ kind of sorted pattern. Data recorder is just amazing because they can just keep adding to it, keep building geometries as you go. If I took this and brought it back, I believe it's adding to it, but it just added probably a ton of multitype tools with 288 faces. And I did a little clean tree here, probably because the data recorder at times, why was I doing that? If I take it through and I do a little bit animate, just taking a look back at my scripts, 24 lines being fabricated as we go. What was coming out of here on this tree is 24 lines. They seemed to all be working. I didn't really even need to clean the data and get rid of the nulls, so there's no problem with that. Sometimes with the Multitype tool, you get this kind of short point or something that has trouble with zeros. But that's it. It's a little tool. I just showed it. It runs. It gets you thinking. Some items within the list item, certainly insert items, item index, list length, some sorting, and of course you can play around with the partition list, reverse list, and things like this. So I'll take that again and I'll pop that on here and I will group it. And what I would suggest is if you've gone through one of my scripts, I obviously like the color blue if you haven't pulled yet. What you can do is when you take one of these scripts, and I do recommend going into one, taking a look through it. It's just easier to collect on things when you ungroup it. But when you go back and you've tried it, I really want to recommend grouping it and then setting it to a color that you kind of like. So it becomes, you've looked at it as a script in the end. These ones I haven't really wrapped my head around, but this one I actually have. So I'll kind of default them to blue to say that I'm at least happy with what's happening. So the next one is a pick and choose and weave tool, which is actually pretty nice in here. And what I've ended up doing, let's take a look at what I've ended up making. A little squiggle, there it is, this one. And this one is like that. So I think we could probably get away with just looking at the top view. So what is being generated here, and why is this gene pool here? I think when you come at understanding sets, a little bit of maths, and you see what I start here with is creating points. And I did those points through a sine. And I've got some amplification here if I want to put it through sine. If I want to, I think it actually already is through sine, but if I wanted to have an amplification on that, I could put that in and then I could amp with this to play with that a little bit. But I guess I'm okay with just sine without the amplification. Then I have another list here that was going through cosine. And there's a certain amount of steps, 12, but you can put in as many as you want. And I've done this before. At the range is obviously going from -4 to 4. You can see because you played around with a little bit of math, so you can actually have really nice time with this. So I like the 4.44 now. So understand that your domain is running along the x, and the y is what's happening to it as it's moving up into the y. I'm not using the z-axis here, so there's no reason to use anything but top view. And then interpolate those curves. But then I wanted you to play around with what's happening with the weave tool. If you have a pattern within weave, and this is a pattern of false true, it's going to select one and then not select one, or not select one, select one, not select one, select one from this point list. It's going to do the exact same down here as the second pattern from this point list, and it will weave those together into this beautiful pattern. And that's where you start to get much more interesting geometry that's based on more information out of the curve. Great little experiment to play with, and then when you start turning that into larger, more continuous geometries, and if you lofted this one to the other one, it could be very exciting. Pick and choose is pretty nice because it actually, the pattern in here as opposed to the weave pattern 0, 1, I've actually got into the number slider in 100 points. And you may not know how much this is, but it's like a true-false pattern for what I would end up picking. So it's pretty chaotic. And if I took that line, I could always go through here. And if I like my line, I would only randomize it like 1%, which it didn't do much. Randomize it 10%, didn't do much. But if I randomize it 100%, you see it really starts to do a little do-si-do. So just getting you up and running with the nodes, playing with a little bit of the math we've learned, and making sure each one's running, and then try and logically figure out what's happening. And computationally wrap your mind around it. The third one is a cross-reference, and so let's just take a look at the end outcome, what we have here. We've got some pretty jazzy stuff here, and on the top view is pretty interesting, but I can imagine in the perspective view it's also interesting. Now, what am I starting to play with here that's making this so wild? I've got a pipe form here that I can cap. I have a mesh pipe, which will run a lot faster. I can actually have it behave more like squares or triangles, or number of sides is actually defaulting to 4. There's no saying you couldn't just type in number of sides 3.6. You get a nice little number slider here, so if you did want to play with those geometries a little different as triangles or hexagons, you could change those as well, and pentagons. So I'll just leave it as 4. And if I do introduce something, I usually add it to the group, so it'll be there. Keep in mind that when I use a number slider and I don't type hardcode something into the quote, that's kind of suggesting why don't you play around with it. That would be a little redundant because it's already actually defaulted into that node. But it is nice to think about these nodes because you may end up getting into some building of your own scripts as well. And then the multipipe is always beautiful just to get some real funkiness as things taper off and become their own geometries. I do like subdivision tool because it makes for a very interesting bake and a very interesting geometry. Now this, of course, isn't what we're actually looking at. Let me just start through a bake and leave here and put that through into a ghosted. Maybe not ghosted, so we don't see the lines. Put it into a render, really see what's going on. There you go. You get these pretty beautiful forms. I'm not sure what you would end up doing that as a piece of geometry, but it's always creative weaving these things together. I go to get rid of that one and go back to ghosted. And what have I done in this script? It seems to be in 2 parts. Well, once again, I picked a domain of building points, and I actually grafted this one, which means it will take the points that were here in the X, and it will match them for every one of the Y. And I also constructed a point up here, but I put it in the Z-axis, so with 2 of these, I can basically, you can see, raise and lower that one. If you're not quite understanding that, go on. Whenever this is Z direction, take a look at the top view, and take a look at the perspective view as you go. And what I did was I used a cross-reference here, which would end up drawing lines between these points and these points, which gives you an outcome like this, which is quite beautiful as a shape. I did a longest list here, and you might be interested to right-click on here and actually start choosing, as I double-click, I believe here, the repeat list, the repeat first, the repeat last. Holistic's pretty cool because you can choose the top lower triangle strict, upper triangle strict, and you get some pretty nice sensitivity in running these. So if I grab the line between these, you can see that becomes a little different as geometry. And this one, the shortest list, gives me this one. So you're actually starting to think of your data. We're not going to masks or anything like that, but I took a little combined data. I thought I like these lines and I like these lines. So what happens when I bring them both together? The result is I get a list of lists. So we go from what do we have here? 100 lines with 20 items on each, and we have 20 items with 4 items on each, and we're combining those, and we just give it another branch, and we're left with 100 coming out of here from pattern 1, combining pattern 1 with pattern 2. I flattened that list to see what it would end up being, and I have to wonder if this really mattered. I could have just gotten away with everything trying to combine them. So I didn't really do much for the script. I dispatch again, which I like when I flatten lists, so I can grab that one section, grab that other section. And I have a dispatch pattern here that I also, depending on what I could do, I can also get in here and randomize and play with things. It's pretty simple because it's a gene pool itself, which we played with in the params. If you do an edit on it, you can really have some good control over what's happening computationally. And then we're back into just piping it with a little radius, and the radius is defaulted here as well. So it might be worth seeing that's defaulted to 1. So we could just grab a number slider 0 to 1 and throw that in the radius, and then we're able to take that down so we can kind of see exactly what's going on as we build it. You might like the angle over here as opposed to the top. That's why I usually leave up all 4 views. I'm also going to pop the radius on here, pop the radius on, don't need the radius on the multitype. Multitype is node size, which defaults to 0.5. I'll put this one in. There we go. Start getting some really cool organic kind of jostling and jumping. subdivision's a bit of a crapshoot, and I kind of really like it for that reason. I will again take this and add it to the group so it's there. And what I would say is if you had deleted that, you want to regroup that whole thing. So say I take this one ungroup, take this one ungroup, and I thought those went well together. Just right select and do your group. And if you've actually made a little bit of sense of it, played with it, jump in here and set it back to your color. So what's our last one? It is dealing with the logic behind list manipulation is essential should anyone who wants to develop their understanding of data trees, lists of lists of lists, with the Parametric tool in list trees nodes, which is where we will end up going with this. I visited it earlier in this video series, and then we'll have to go a little harder into it. Generate a list and play with these nodes. So what I've got here is a data recorder, which allows me to go in and see this list here. I can actually generate a list of numbers just by doing a slider, and that's exactly what I did. And then you're taking a look at the outcome of all of those lists running through really just data at this point with a domain. If we go in order, you'll see I basically was playing with insert items, and that's literally what I was doing as I went through with item index. And you're seeing evidence where that item index is. You can put it in the indices at that item. And then partition list, which breaks it into chunks. Really nice. I've got 4 chunks that are coming out of here, but I could make those more chunks or less chunks. And then you can see how replace items is going with numbers, shift list is going. And if you're more into the computational side with maths, you could start to relate this in your mind to programming with letters and characters and how that works for most programming languages. Split list will do things to it as well. If you do get lost in the numbers and want something very simple, I would suggest going back in here, clearing your data right here. You don't need a visual, except my face is right here. I'll just move it over here. And you could probably set up something that's a little more understandable, like 2 point. Actually, let's just do 2, and we'll get a nice number slider, 2 to 10. We can quickly grab all of this and Control-Shift, grab that out and slap it in here. And now you see we'll clear the data, and we can kind of have a sense of what's happening as we roll through this number slider, which is less decimals. And you see that it's popping these in, it's partitioning the list, it's replacing items as it goes, and you slide back and forth and slowly get a feel over what this is doing to numbers. Every number is going to direct your geometries, be it a distance between lines, be it the creation of that line, the number of points within a cluster of, what is that one? The sets tool. If I actually jumped into vectors and populated 2D or populated 3D or populated geometries. So I do like this kind of little machine for driving data. And it's kind of more experimental. It's not tied to the computer doing all the work for you. You get a sense of kind of sculpting, in my mind, sculpting lists. So that's enough. This is a little bit long, 17 minutes. We've run through that data exercise, and that leaves us with a lot of the information within lists, down the shortest list, and I think we didn't get into call index and all the things we'll be doing next in sequences. This was just a little section of playing around. Why did I add these ones here? This was all item index. Oh, it's just the ones I was missing further up because I don't use them often, so I thought I'd put them in at the end just to drive data. Thanks again for watching.